Well, we're coming to the end of our class. In Unit 7, your homework is Chapter 7 through 9. 7 and 9, sorry, not through 9. I don't want to put any fear in anyone. You don't have a tremendous number of problems, but the Chapter 9 ones in particular are really long. So we'll be talking about that in long, but not necessarily difficult, just very detailed. So let's take the chapters one by one and you'll see what I mean. Chapter 7's concept is probably going to be very refreshing compared to the difficulty of process costing that you have been working on. If you look with me at exercise 748, page 327, you'll see the type of problems this chapter is going to involve. The company will have two product lines or two departments, or somehow they'll be separating their functions into two groups. In this case, they make briefcases, two types, the elegant one and the fina. I may be pronouncing that wrong, but the two models of briefcases. And they've tracked how much material goes into each one, how much labor, how many of them they're going to make in a year, the number of machine hours it takes to make each one, and how many setup hours to set up the equipment. And you can see this in a chart in the problem. They're going to make 3,000 of each of the products, so the same number of products. Each one are going to use and incur costs. They're going to use the setting up of equipment. That runs $3,000. Should we just give $1,500 to each product line and say that's your share of this cost? Or is there a more appropriate way to share it? Machining the same way. Half and half, because we're making equal number of products. We would have, in prior chapters, lumped these two costs, setting up equipment and machining, and all the other overhead costs into one big pile of overhead costs and come up with a predetermined overhead rate. Well, that is chapter saying that may not be the best way to apply overhead to jobs or to the process. It may be better to take every one of those individual overhead costs and allocate it separately. Remember, in the old chapters, we were giving out overhead usually based on the number of direct labor hours, or maybe the direct labor dollars. But usually there was some basis like that that was the way we applied the overhead. It was called a driver. Well, in this chapter, they're saying we should let different activities drive the different costs. So in the case of setting up the equipment, it's a $3,000 cost. And the most logical way to split it is based on the number of setup hours. So $3,000, how many setup hours are they going to do in the upcoming period for which this $3,000 represents? We have to look at both product lines. 100 hours of setup are going to be needed in the elegant line and 100 in the other product line. So in that case, it would be equally spread between the two product lines. If they used the amount of direct labor, you can see that that would be quite different. The elegant product line uses 3 times as much direct labor as the other product line. So in this case, we will be looking at 3,000 divided by 200 setup hours. And that will give us a rate of $15 per setup hour. So if we were to pass that cost off to the two product lines, it'd be 1,500, half and half, half to Elegant and half to Fina. And that may be the way they choose. That seems to me to be the logical way to allocate that cost. It's dependent on how much setup is done. A lot of times the products that they give you will have quite a discrepancy between how many hours of setup they take. One might require a lot more setup than the other, thus it should share a lot more of the cost. The other cost that they give us is machining. And here the cost is $18,000, and logical to divide it by machine hours. So that'll be 18,000 divided by only 500 hours for Elegant because they're almost exclusively handmade. But Fina is made pretty much on the machine. We add that together, it's 5,000 machine hours in total. So our rate is $4, and that is not, that's rounded, $3.60 per machine hour. So if we want to figure out how much Elegant should get, how much Fina should get, Elegant used 500 machine hours, so it should get $3.60 times 500 hours. So its share of the cost is only going to be $1,800. Where Fina used all the rest, 4,500 hours times $3.60. Quite a discrepancy between the two. We're going to put a lot more of the machining cost in the column for the Fina products. The problem is probably going to ask you to determine the total cost of making each product. Now, they'll each have direct materials, they each have direct labor, and they'll each have overhead costs, which include setup and machining. Remember, together these are overhead. And the labor and materials, although I wrote them in the opposite order in which they were listed in the book, all we've got to do is copy the information. Looks like the materials are exactly the same. The amount of labor, remember we said that Elegant are handmade, so that makes a lot of sense of why there's so much labor costs there. And then we can go and grab the cost we put for setup. Each one got 1,500. And then we can bring down the costs. And then total them up. So to make the Elegant product, the grand total is $15,300. Divide by number of products. Remember how many we said we were going to make? We're going to make 3,000 of each. So the cost of making one Elegant briefcase is $5 and something. Again, it's rounding. And we'll do the same thing in the other column. There you go. $5.10 and $7.90. Because there is so much overhead on the fine or Fina line, they're going to incur more of the overhead. Even though they use more labor, it doesn't balance out as much as using all the machine time. You'll be looking at problems like this. You have problems 730. Get you the numbers again. 730, 733, and 737. And they're going to involve very similar ideas for each one of them. I'm looking at 737 right now, and instead of elegant and fina, they make greeting cards and they make scented cards and regular cards. And you'll be allocating 4 different costs. Instead of just setup and machining, you're allocating 4 different costs based on different things. For example, they spent $7,500 inspecting products. So you're going to allocate the inspecting products cost of $7,500, some to the regular cards and some to the scented. And the problem will tell you how to allocate them. What basis or what driver do they use? I really think Chapter 7 will go very well for you. Don't think you'll run into much problem there. Please let me know if you start getting into the problems and thought, okay, I thought it made sense when I watched the lecture, and then I tried to do it, and it made no sense. So let me know if that is causing you problems, and we can work through a few more problems. Where I want to spend our time is Chapter 9. If you jump with me to Chapter 9, there's a great diagram in the very beginning. And take me a second to get a page number for you. But pages 384, talking about budgeting. And you will see that a master budget, when a company says it's budgeting, especially a manufacturer, it's not really just making one budget. They're making lots of budgets. They're all represented by different boxes in that flow chart on 384. But they all begin with one particular budget, the sales budget. The sales budget drives everything else. Once a committee sits down and says, I think next year we can sell this many products for this price. Whether they budget month by month, quarter by quarter, someone has to make that decision. And as you do your homework, you're playing the accountant role. The accountant isn't the one making that decision. They crunch the numbers. They'll look at various scenarios, represent a report on trends that they've seen, but the decision is probably multifaceted. Marketing's got to come into the decision, talking about what they think realistically can be sold. Production has to come into the meeting and say, you think you can sell that many, but there's no way I can make that many. Everybody has a little say in developing that sales budget. Your role will only be to turn it into a document that tells the story in a logical way. So what I thought we'd do is look at a problem and work through these budgets as we talk about them. You can see I had kind of a framework of some budgets up here, but I don't have any particular problems set up yet. So let's look at one that we could do. Sorry, just looking through the chapter trying to find a good budget. You have problem 951 as your group project. And that may be a good place to start. Why don't we just go ahead and kind of get a jump start on the group project. It encompasses so much. It starts on page 424. The very bottom goes on to 425. That's just giving you information. That isn't telling you yet what you're responsible for doing. When you turn to page 426, you see that you have 11 things that you're supposed to complete, and they're all various budgets. This is not going to be a problem which you can tell someone in the group to do problem or parts 1 and 2, someone else to do 3 and 4, and so on, because each budget depends on the one before it. And if you gave somebody the responsibility of doing the direct labor budget, they're going to have to do all the budgets before that, or practically all of them, in order to do the labor budget. So you might as well work together as a team, getting each piece done so the next person can take the lead and do the next budget. But we'll get some set up here and maybe there won't be so much to pass out. What it asked us to do is budget out the upcoming year, 2000X1. Notice they don't say 2011, 2021. They're just kind of leaving it up to us to interpret whatever that might be. And we're going to make a column for each quarter. So instead of saying July, August, and September, we'll say first quarter, second quarter, and third quarter, and stretch our budget out here to have a fourth quarter. So a lot of our formatting we'll need to copy over. Yeah. The sales budget. It tells us in the story, starting way back on page 424, that the fourth quarter of last year, 2000X0, was 55,000 units. Don't really need that for the sales budget right now. We want to report on 2000X1. And part B says unit sales by quarter. So they're telling us how many units they're going to sell each quarter in the upcoming year. That's the very top of page 425. So I'm just going to copy that information into this spreadsheet. And you're probably seeing numbers fill in below me here because I asked it to go and grab some information when I do the later budgets. But right now, this is where our focus is going to be, just looking at the sales budget. All we are reporting so far in the sales budget is how many units we're selling. The sales budget really needs to report dollar amounts too. So we need to take it a step further and say, how much are we going to sell them for? We're going to sell them for $400 a piece. And that makes the information in the columns a little bit bigger. There we go. 65,000 products at $400 a piece is a pretty hefty amount of sales. And as you can see, they're expecting over the next year for their sales to grow each quarter. Now we have our sales budget. We can report to somebody. A lot of times the budget will have a column over here that's for total. Feel free to add that and just say for the whole year, our sales are going to be 65 plus 70 plus 75 plus 90, and we could auto sum it up. We're going to sell 300,000 products in the upcoming year. We're going to sell them for $400 a piece. So we'll do the same math. 300,000 times $400 is a lot of money. $120,000. The focus is going to be on these columns here, but the total is sometimes nice to help because as we get to the final part of the budgeting process, we're projecting what our financial statements will look like at the very end of 2000X1. So we'll actually say, well, if all our budgets come true, our revenue on our income statement will be $120 million. Of course, budgets are made of a lot of estimates, so nothing's going to be perfect. That's only a rough estimate of what we really think the number's going to be. From the sales budget, then, lots of departments can get started. First, the production budget. Production department has to think, so we're going to sell 300,000 products next year. I think I need to get busy making products. But they don't necessarily need to make 300,000 products. They might already have a whole bunch of products ready-made, sitting in the warehouse, waiting to be sold. So they really don't need to make quite so much. They're already stocked up. But they also might not want to sell so many that they deplete everything in their inventory. Maybe they want to end the year with a few products left over in the inventory so that they can roll into the next year, 2000X2, with some inventory on hand to get started on that year. So we have to take some things into consideration. But all the other budgets need the production budget. So after the production budget, we're going to make a direct materials budget, which is what I like to call a shopping list. Once production decides how many they need to make, the production budget kicks in and says, ooh, then I think I need to go shopping because that's going to be a lot of raw materials to make all those products. And just as we do when we're making a shopping list, if you've decided you're having Thanksgiving dinner and now you know how many people are coming, then you've got to think about your production, your cooking. How many pies is that going to be? How much mashed potatoes? How much stuffing? How much turkey? And so on. Once you figure out what you need to make, your production, then you start looking at the cupboards. If I'm going to make that many pies, I am definitely going to need more flour, more this, more that. And you budget out how much you need to buy, taking into consideration what's already in the cupboard and the fact that you probably don't want to cut it too close. You want to have a little cushion in there, a little left over in case something goes wrong in the cooking and you use a little more than you budgeted for, or you just don't want to be out the day after Thanksgiving because you used it all when you were doing your cooking. So you end up making a shopping list, a direct materials budget, even turning it into how much money is it going to cost for all the items that I just decided I needed to purchase. We'll take away our headings here that say July through September. And then we have to think about labor. We do when we're thinking about that Thanksgiving dinner, but a manufacturer has to think about it even in more detail. Once they decide how many units they're going to produce, which I know we haven't filled in, and these aren't the numbers yet, but just getting an overview. Once the production budget, we know how many units we're going to produce, we have to start thinking how many people is that going to take? How many shifts? How many people hours is it going to take to produce all those products? And then we have to look at the overhead and all those elements that go into overhead, because a good chunk of overhead is variable, and that depends on production. Selling, probably your selling expenses will base on how many sales you're going to make. General and administrative budget just keeps spiraling from there. Each budget feeds on the budget before, or at least comes back to sales and production. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of these so you can get an idea of where we're going. We now know what our sales are going to be, so let's look at production. Production says, letter C, there is no beginning inventory of finished goods. So I've made a little 5-box diagram here, and it says that we have no beginning finished goods. In other words, our warehouse is empty as we roll into the first quarter of our year that we're budgeting. We do know that we want to have some items left over in ending inventory. They tell us that Optima is planning the following ending finished goods inventory for each quarter. So they would like to end the first quarter of the year with 13,000 products waiting to roll into the second quarter. Well, they have none. They're going to plan on selling 65,000 units in the first quarter. Remember, our sales budget tells us they're planning to sell 65. So we have to make enough so that we can have all what we're planning on selling, plus have 13,000 left over. So we need to have 78,000 units during this quarter. We don't have any made already, so we need to produce all of those 78,000. So now we know our production for the first quarter is 78,000. the way the budget sets it up, it says, what do I want as my budgeted ending inventory? Sometimes this is given to us like it is here, is 13,000. Sometimes, and that's what these lines are for, it's set up as they would like a certain percentage of the next month, next quarter's sales as their ending inventory. In other words, instead of telling you first quarter we'd like to end with 13,000 units, they're going to make you do a math problem to find out how many units they would like to have left at the end of the first quarter. So I'm just going to take those two lines out of there because we don't need that information. Our problem was nice and told us at the end of the first quarter we want 13,000 units and we plan on selling 65,000. That number was just tied with what I typed in up here, giving us the 78,000, just like our 5-box diagram. And we know we had 0 to begin with. So this last box should say 78,000 minus how much I have in beginning inventory, which is none, makes 78,000. To make that cement in a little bit, I want to do the next quarter. And then I'll leave you 2 quarters to fill in for yourself or for your group. So let's build the 5-box diagram for the second quarter. Let's just go down here, grab it all, and put it over to the side. How will we begin the second quarter? Will we have any finished goods waiting for us as we begin? Yes. We had 13,000 units in ending inventory at the end of the first quarter. Those will be there waiting for us at the beginning of the second quarter. How do we want to end the second quarter? I'm trying to go through and delete out information. According to our book, we want to end the second quarter with 15,000 units. And we plan on selling, so let's go get that number. We plan on selling 70,000 units in the second quarter. So we plan on selling 70 and having 15 left over. That's a total of 85,000. 13,000 of which will already be on hand, so we don't need to make them. We need to make everything else. We need to make 72,000 units. That's what production will need to be thinking about in the second quarter. So we'll fill it in. Our ending inventory for the second quarter is 15,000. Our sales are 70, giving us 85. And our beginning inventory is the same as the ending from the quarter before. So now we have our 72,000. So to fill in the other 2 quarters, you're going to need to put in the information. You're going to put in ending inventory, make sure that all the numbers work through. My suggestion is play with the 5-box diagram, get your head wrapped around what's going on, and then make sure that is the same thing that's happening in your production budget over here. And don't forget you need to add a column for the fourth quarter. But each quarter will roll into the next quarter. And now that you know how many you need to produce, we can jump down to the direct materials budget. And in letter D, it tells us that each of these storage devices that we're making uses 5 hours of labor, which we don't care about right now. That'll happen in the labor budget, and 3 units of direct material. I hate the term units because it's used too much. Why don't we say that a unit is a pound? To make one of these mass storage units that we make, it takes 3 pounds of direct material. And as we keep reading, labor is so much per hour, and 1 pound of direct material costs $80. I can wrap my head around that a whole lot better than I can a unit. They're trying to be generic and not name pounds or ounces or linear feet of material or put it in any kind of measurement. They just call it a unit. But since we're calling the products we're making units, that can get confusing. So back to our production. I had the formulas copy down so that whatever we ended with here becomes the beginning of our direct materials budget. And we know that it takes 3 pounds for every unit that we're going to make. So if we're going to make 78,000 products and they each take 3 pounds of material, we're going to need 234,000 pounds of material. That's what this 5-box diagram is trying to help us with. And there's some leftover numbers in it. We know that we are going to need 234,000 pounds of material. That's what we're going to use in production during the first quarter. But we still have those same questions. How many do we already have on hand? Do we want to have any left over for the second quarter? And then we can start working our way to how many do we need to purchase. So as I keep reading, letter E says there are 65,700 units of direct material, or we're going to call it pounds of direct material, in beginning inventory as of January 1st. So 65,700 pounds already there. So we don't need to buy everything. We already have some. And then it says Optima plans to have 30% of the direct materials needed for the next quarter's unit sales. So we look at the next quarter, what their sales were at 3 pounds per unit. Let's see, we want to have leftover 30% of 70,000 units times 3 pounds. I know that sounds confusing, but first of all, take the next quarter and figure out how many products that would be, or how many pounds of material. So 70,000 times 3 pounds is 210,000 pounds of raw material. And we want to have 30% of that in ending inventory. So we want to have 30% times $210,000. We want to have 63,000 pounds of raw materials in ending inventory when the first quarter ends. That means we'll need to have the 234 that we'll use for production, plus what we'd like to have left over. We're going to need almost 300,000 pounds of raw material during the first quarter. We have some already, so we need to shop for the rest. So we need to buy 231,300 pounds of raw materials. Let's go and fill it in the way our budget displays the information. It says the ending inventory we want is 63,000. We'll start with 65,700. So we will need to purchase 231,300 pounds of raw material. And it says the raw materials cost $80 a pound. So now we know how much we're going to have to spend in the first quarter just for raw materials. And again, we would replicate this for each of the quarters as we work through the year. Remembering that how we end the first quarter will be the second quarter's beginning inventory. The labor budget's even easier because there's no beginning and ending. You don't store up extra hours. The production is 78,000 units in the first quarter, and according to Part D, it takes 5 hours to make one of our products. So that's 390,000 hours of labor needed in the first quarter. And we pay our people $10 an hour. So $3.9 million is our budgeted cost for labor. And overhead totals $1 million for each quarter. So we would just go and put $1 million in every one of the columns for all 4 quarters. And of this total, 350 represents depreciation. We'll need that later. Variable overhead, letter H, is budgeted at $6 per direct labor hour. So I'll put $6 in there. And remember, we already figured out our direct labor hours. So those are copied down, multiplied by $6, and you get your total variable overhead. Add it to the fixed overhead of $1 million, and you know your overhead. Each budget's going to feed on the next one. You've got a lot of columns to fill in, but I think together, as you work on this as your group, things will make more sense. You have an individual problem that is very similar to this. So use the template. Feel free to use the Excel spreadsheet I've got set up, or make one of your own and follow the template. The cornerstones in the book are awesome in walking you through step by step how they get the information. There's also a cash budget at the very end that you'll be looking at, and they've been feeding us pieces of the information. But the cash budget really is something that we all do. We don't write it down necessarily, and we definitely don't label it like they do. But the cash budget takes a look at periods of time, whether it's the next 2 weeks between one paycheck and the next one, or we're looking at a month, a quarter of the year, the whole year. But we look at our checkbook. We look at how much is in it, what I expect to receive. So, okay, I know I'm going to get paid in a couple days. So that's my inflow. For a company, their inflow is cash receipts from customers. It's making and selling products, receiving money from accounts receivable, and so on. So they know or can estimate how much they're going to receive in that period of time. That'll add to the beginning balance that's already there. And then through all these other budgets we've been looking at, they can see that there's going to be a lot of money spent in all these categories. So between looking at what's coming in and what's going out, they can have a pretty good idea how they are going to end each quarter. And they can compare that to their goals. They'll often say that the company likes to keep a minimum of this many dollars in their checking account. And if your budget is looking like they're not going to get to that number that they want, there'll probably be a story problem that says the company has an arrangement with like a revolving line of credit at the bank. So you need to figure out how much they'll need to borrow in that quarter to make sure that their balance becomes the minimum. And then in quarters where they bring in enough that they have a nice excess and they're well above the minimum, they can take some of that cushion and pay off or pay a good chunk on that loan that they borrowed in another quarter when they were a little short. So the cash budget is really helpful. It just helps you lay out what money's going to come in, what money's going to go out, and where do I think I'm going to be at the end of each of the months or quarters. Take some time, work through the different types of budgets. I don't think I would play with a cash budget until you've done several of the sales, production, purchases budgets that we've been looking at. Kind of work those concepts until you're comfortable with those budgets, then move on and do a bunch of cash budgets. If you bounce from budget to budget to budget, you may find yourself just really confused. And remember, I will never know what order you did your homework in. So there's no requirement that says you must do exercise 1 before you do exercise 2 and so on. You can play with a half of exercise 1 and then move on to another half of exercise 2 and then come back and finish exercise 1 and so on. Now, I will email all these out to you, and please let me know how you're doing and if you have questions. And I'm going to try in the next few days, definitely by the end of the weekend, have the lecture up for the remaining 3 chapters. I think it's 10, 11, and 13, but don't quote me on the chapter numbers. and so that you can get a good start on those, because we're heading into our last week of class. Tuesday will start week 8 and will be, I believe, our first night for presentations. So hopefully you're working on your presentations. Don't worry, those um, the way you're going to set them up is as if you were in a classroom. Make a PowerPoint presentation just as if you were going to be presenting it in a physical classroom, and I'll help you convert it in the same program I'm using to make this. In Zoom, you'll be able to show it, and everyone will be able to see what you're presenting and hear you talk about it without having to change it into some other format. PowerPoint will work just fine. So have a good night, and hopefully 7 and 9 will be homework that makes a lot of sense.